What is the nature of this world? Jesus said, "Know what is in front of your face, and what is hidden from you will be disclosed to you." At least in part, perhaps quantum science can reveal what has been hidden. Let us look to it to discover the unexpected nature of what we believe to be matter. Our world is made of quantum particles, but are these particles at all? An electron is an area of space. Scientists describe the electron space as the electron cloud to differentiate it from other areas of space. But this area has nothing in it but a set of properties. But what about the rest of an atom? Protons and neutrons are made of even smaller particles called quarks. Like electrons, quarks are also non-physical areas that contain properties. Therefore, the entirety of the atom is not solid, but merely property-holding areas in space. And since atoms form the basis of our world, this brings the nature of all matter into question. What if the electron is a force? And that any qualities of the electron that we measure, such as charge, is the nature of the forces and not of matter. But whether we see the electron as a non-physical property-holding area, or still hold the view that it is a particle, we are still dealing with lots and lots of space. In the case of neutrinos, the most abundant particle in our known universe, 100 trillion neutrinos pass straight through our bodies, unimpeded, every second. There is only a 1 in 4 chance that a single neutrino will interact with an atom in your body in your entire life, because neutrinos interact only with the weak nuclear force that controls radioactive decay. The neutrino can even pass through the Earth unimpeded. Does the neutrino not prove to us that the nature of reality is space? Perhaps James, the brother of Jesus, alluded to this non-material nature when he said, "What is your life? You are a mist that appears for a little while and then vanishes." While force is the change of energy over distance, power is the change of energy over time. When an ailing woman touched only Jesus' clothes, Jesus, immediately knowing in himself that power had gone out of him, turned around in the crowd and said, "Who touched my clothes?" This word for power used in the ancient Greek text is dunamis, a word that can also be translated to force. This awareness of significant changes in energy is a perception that goes beyond the senses. Relying solely on the senses to cultivate our view of reality lands us in limited perception, and quantum science proves this. So let us look at what the senses truly perceive through the eyes of quantum science. The sense of touch does not indicate to us what we think it does. The solid feel is not due to solidness, but rather it is due to forces. The electromagnetic force between charged particles is the main force that creates this experience of solidity. To better understand this, picture that electrons push each other away, as do two like poles of a magnet. When you hold the ends of two magnets with the same polarity together, you feel resistance, as if something is there. Can you see this something in between the magnets? No, we cannot. But can we feel it? Yes, we feel this non-physical force. The same could be said for our sense of touch. Just as the magnetic force creates the illusion of solidity, so too does the electromagnetic force create the illusion of solidity. The feeling of solidity is due to force, and not due to solidity of matter itself, because electrons do not even approach each other close enough to touch. And since our bodies are made of atoms with an outer layer of electrons, then we never really touch anything at all. All we really feel is force, especially now knowing that the particles themselves are non-physical. When atoms bond together to form molecules, or when molecules bond together to form what we understand as matter, it is also by the electromagnetic force. So what keeps the force particles of an object together is force. And thus, our sense of touch is not in any way an indication that objects of this world are solid. But what about sight? If the world is either mostly space or all space, why then do we see solid objects? Light is energy or force. It is only when light interacts with something else that we get to see it. That is why we do not see the sun's light in outer space. So, for us to see this light, we need the other player in this, electrons. But we now know that electrons are not solid and could be described more accurately as forces in space. When light and electrons interact, we see selected frequencies of energy that are the products of this interaction between the forces of light and electrons. What we are really seeing is evidence of force interacting with force, and not evidence of solidity. And although we are perceiving solid by touch and sight, the truth of it is that of forces, or subtle properties of space. If we were to see this world as it really is, then that would likely make navigating it difficult. We could see nothing, or we could see everything, even air, and all may look the same, being made of the same stuff. So the brain had to adapt in order to enable survival for the body in the world. Evidence that what we see is merely an interpretation and not absolute proof of reality is that color perception differs from animal to animal. Like this, the senses of smell, hearing, and taste are also the interpretation by the mind of a stimulus that is not physical. Thus, the senses do not give us an accurate understanding of our reality, only an interpretation of it for the sake of life. And this is why the senses are constrained within the range of usefulness to the body. But the perception of the true reality is left to the deeper introspective powers and spiritual powers of humanity. Jesus said, "I shall give you what no eye has seen, and what no ear has heard, and what no hand has touched, and what has never occurred to the human mind." But what about pain? Does pain prove the solidity of the body? As with the other senses, pain is also an assessment by the brain, but it does not serve as proof of solidity. When something breaks or changes physically in some way, it is due either to the addition of energy or loss of energy to that space. The change may be brought about by mechanical force or chemical reaction, but when it comes down to it, it is all exchange of energy or force, and is therefore not an indication of solidity. And perhaps this explains why Jesus could heal an ear that was just sliced through with a sword. For when all is force or energy that has its basis in space, then surely that energy can be manipulated with ease by those who are aware of its nature and are connected to that source of this true nature. When Philip tried to convince Nathanael of Jesus' divinity, Nathanael agreed to proceed with him to Jesus. Jesus saw Nathanael coming toward him and said of him, "Behold, an Israelite indeed, in whom is no deceit." Nathanael said to him, "How do you know me?" Jesus answered and said to him, "Before Philip called you, when you were under the fig tree, I saw you." Nathanael was astounded by this information that Jesus could not have gotten by any other means but by knowledge of what is beyond one's body and senses. On a quantum level, there is a characteristic that comes forth that scientists have been grappling with. They refer to this as spooky behavior, but what they ought to call it is intelligence. There have been examples of intelligence cropping up in the behavior of the components of the quantum realm. An astonishing example of this is from the three-polarizer paradox experiment. In the experiment, by means of slits made in one direction, a polarized lens allows only a specific direction of light waves through. If you add another lens behind the first, with slits in the opposite direction, the second lens will block what light passed through the first lens. This is all as expected, but here is where it gets interesting. If you add another lens between these two lenses, but this time at 45 degrees or diagonal to the other two lenses, light now passes through all three lenses. How can an additional filter allow more light through? It seems that at the second lens, the light turned 45 degrees to fit through the diagonal slits. It then turned 45 degrees again to allow light to pass through three filters when it didn't pass through two. Could it be that light waves can make the decision to turn at least 45 degrees to fit through a gap? How could light assess the situation and make this decision, if not through intelligence? The intelligence of all variety of forces is apparent, for what each force must carry out within limits that it must assess and apply is complex. Mathematicians have had to include infinite amounts of virtual particles to describe the functions carried out by fundamental forces. These virtual particles seem to be needed to mathematize the intelligence of forces, and thus the intelligence of space. Thus, all variety of forces that make up our reality can be described as the intelligence of space. But consciousness is needed for intelligence to exist. Therefore, we can say that our world is built from consciousness. We can take this understanding further when we take into consideration that consciousness and spirit is one and the same thing. Thus, since all is space, space which exhibits intelligence, intelligence which is a result of consciousness, consciousness which is spirit, all is constituted of spirit. From the understanding of the spirit nature of all things is born our perception of the real unity of all. So we fix our eyes not on what is seen, but on what is unseen, since what is seen is temporary, but what is unseen is eternal. And this unseen spirit that underlies our reality, we know to be divine, to be holy, to be God. Jesus said, "For God is spirit, so those who worship him must worship in spirit and in truth." Therefore, if all is spirit and spirit is God, this confirms beliefs that place God as the foundation of everything, as the basis of all, as its very material. Jesus displayed a deep knowledge of the universe's makeup when he gave us love as the most important commandment. For the universe is made of spirit, which is God, and God is love. Therefore, love is the foundation of our universe. But to love like Jesus is not to be the servants of evil systems. To love like Jesus is to turn the tables in the temples of evil, even while recognizing the spirit that is God in each. When quantum particles become what is referred to as entangled, they become related via proximity or interaction such that they respond as one thing, united. Amazingly, if these entangled particles are then to be separated, as soon as one particle is changed or affected, say through measurement, the entangled particle will immediately display the same reaction as the affected particle. This shows consciousness, relationship, and a union that supersedes physical distance. On entanglement, Spiridon Mikalakis of Caltech's Institute for Quantum Information and Matter said, "The particles act together like a single object, whose identity lies not with the individual components, but in a higher plane. It becomes something larger than itself. We all belong to something larger than ourselves, larger than the individual components, and we are a part of this divine patchwork of spirit." Max Planck, the physicist involved in the understanding of energy at a quantum level, said, "Science cannot solve the ultimate mystery of nature, and that is because, in the last analysis, we ourselves are a part of the mystery that we are trying to solve." But spirituality does have answers, although seldom revealed and then seldom understood. It tells us that although the universe is ultimately composed only of one thing, which is God as spirit, this spirit must produce itself in two ways for the sake of the creation of the universe. These two ways that spirit appears in the world are matter and spirit itself. This can also be described as the observed and the observer. Since we have consciousness, we have to be the observer. But we also know that the observer is the spirit. We are spirit as our fundamental reality, and although all is spirit as its basis, we are even more so in that true form of spirit than the inert matter around us. But it is clear that most of us do not fit into the identity of being one with spirit, that is God. So if we were meant to be in the state of spirit, as full consciousness and love, how did we get to be in the state of semi-consciousness and ignorance? And how do we explain the imperfections and all too often evil behaviors that we observe in humanity? That answer could be hidden into the story of the fall of man. We were once set in paradise. The senses fooled the observer into believing that we are the body instead of the spirit. We now know that the senses are limited and do not reflect the truth of the reality of the universe. This limited sensory experience drew the observer in, consuming us and cementing false beliefs about what creation was about, making the observer believe that this was all there is. And it seemed that the world and all those within it were separate from oneself and not one continuation of spirit as it is in truth. This sense of separateness motivated the pursuit of dominance of all kinds. When we identify ourselves with the observed instead of the observer, in other words, when we identify ourselves with the body, its possessions, its lineage, its relationships, or even the ordinary mind, which is limited to the body, its senses, and its ego, then the observer pretends it is the observed. In the East, this incomplete perception is known as the veil of illusion, and it is something that can be removed to reveal a fuller perception, even while in the sensory world within this life. Evil is created because the limited or warped perception creates warped beliefs. And these beliefs go on to influence the creation of our experiences. And this is perhaps one of the reasons why Jesus said, "Do to others as you would have them do to you." For what we do, which is based on what we believe, goes on to influence our experiences. Therefore, a belief that we are bodies or the mind limited to the body causes a lack of love and often sensory overindulgence, which in turn cause feelings of inferiority or superiority, competition and conflict, greed and war, experiences of suffering, or situations of evil. And since the false beliefs that cause these are a result of the veil that masks the truth, the root cause of the bad in this world is thus the veil of ignorance itself. But that ignorance can be removed, and if it is removed en masse, can produce the golden age of peace, unity, and holiness on earth, which many await. But the success of the dawning of that age lies in the hands of each of us to connect with that spirit that is God more and more, till God's presence affects and infuses our very nature. For as Jesus has said, "Remain in me, as I also remain in you." But it is also said that the Lord is near to all who call on him, but to all who call on him in truth. We must therefore place importance on making every effort to do away with false notions and its associated behaviors, and to understand the point and value of this life, and move with determination towards that goal of being fully connected with God. Jesus has said, "Yet a time is coming and has come when the true worshippers will worship the Father in the Spirit and in truth, for they are the kind of worshippers the Father seeks." What is the nature of God as Spirit? God as Spirit must be equality, for all parts of Spirit are equal. It must be unity, for Spirit is one. And it must be the expansive love that comes from such unity with all. God as Spirit must therefore be goodness and mercy, which comes from love, all of which constitute holiness, and brings about a true contentment, stillness, and joy, which too is the nature of spirit. It is this nature of spirit that we must make the effort to focus on and become. For no focus on God would be complete if we do not make efforts to align our actions, words, and thoughts with this holy nature. Jesus said, "On that day you will realize that I am in my Father, and you are in me, and I am in you." This is that unity that is of the Spirit. Jesus speaks of the distinction between the spirit view and the physical view when he said, "That which is flesh, and that which is born of the Spirit is spirit." Jesus is saying that we need to be born into a spirit perspective and nature, which is not the ordinary physical perspective and is not an identity and belief that one is the flesh form, even as we have to exist within the flesh form to achieve this goal. By believing that all is what the senses tell you it is, we remain deluded. Whereas, in contrast, by faith in the spirit reality of all, we become released from the delusion and freed back into paradise. We become awakened to our reality by experiencing a sense of unity with that spirit that encompasses all. However, this perception of spirit in all is not about being blind to the evil that does exist in the world, which is yet under the effects of the veil. Not seeing evil as evil is also a limitation in perception, for both matter and spirit must be perceived at once for us to function in this world and for us to be able to avoid the evil which will prevent us from reaching our goal. To fully benefit from the experience the world offers us, we must be able to see the world view and spirit view in juxtaposition. A juxtaposition is when two things are observed together to permit comparison. The human life is so valuable because it is in a human life that we can perceive both God and the world together, so that we can fully awaken in understanding through the deeper and deeper comparison. By this contrast of the world with God, we can refine ourselves and build our faith in and experience of the unseen. But a juxtaposition, as in art, is never completely dissimilar. Underlying the apparent differences and variety exists a continuous element of sameness as spirit. This sameness exists even in those persons that are not displaying godly qualities now, for deep under the illusory layers of each individual, beyond time and the perception of matter, lies the incorruptible spirit, ever whole and ever present, waiting to one day show itself again. The spiritual journey cannot be separated from the world, for it is in this world that we must perceive the world for what it really is. And so, even though the world presents us with the sensory experience that deludes us, the world is also the place where we must overcome this perception. Jesus pointed us in the right direction and showed us the way. And that way is not towards one specific individual, but towards spirit, which underlies all, and towards a state which we can realize in this lifetime. But because we bear witness to the imperfections within humanity and within ourselves, we struggle to accept such an outcome and refuse even to move towards such a realization and experience. However, It is by this same limited perception that we are kept in such a perspective, and for us to transcend this, we must have faith in a reality that is beyond the veil of ignorance, a faith that ones such as Jesus enable and point us to and serve as models of. Now when Jesus was asked by the Pharisees when the kingdom of God would come, he answered them and said, "The kingdom of God does not come with observation, nor will they say, 'See here,' or 'See there,' for indeed the kingdom of God is within you." In this, we are told that the treasure that is the essence of the universe is within our very selves, as spirit, in its pure, unaltered, unimpeded form, meaning that God, in his true unveiled form that is fully conscious and fully divine, is within us. And therefore we can connect with God in every moment and in every place without need for pilgrimage and posture, holy building or organization. For that existence of spirit within us is not dependent on our religious identity, for religion is subject to the world of matter and of time, and spirit is what is beyond all of this. That spirit that is God within us can be accessed and can support us through every trial in every day, and can fill in for our every lack when we seek his guidance. God within us can speak to us through the conscience, through the feelings that guide one along the path of goodness, so that he may light our individual path. For we matter to him, for we are a part of him in our true forms. And to reach such a true form and state, we must discard what we are now, in identity and in habits that do not align with the will of God. For these lives are for our journey to him and for him, and are not about the separate or ego selves. As God is within us, he is within all. For our inheritance is everyone's inheritance, just as our source is everyone's source. And with this comes the realization of the preciousness of human life, with such a lofty goal set before each, an incomparable goal that brings the experience of peace, not as security in weapons, but as security in God. Contentment, not of the senses, but of the presence of God within us, always as one with us. Strength in resoluteness of love and not in dominion. A happiness in this contentment of the knowledge of the state of the real self, and not in temporary power or the approval of egos. An experience that surpasses all experiences and descriptions, and yet can be enjoyed alongside all experiences, to enrich the life we lead in the world and infuse it with a worth and a depth that cannot be found anywhere but in spirit. This connection to the spirit within is that ultimate experience, the kingdom of God, where joy, peace, and love are not just something we experience, but something we are. This pure, unaltered spirit that is within us is surely the treasure that Jesus speaks of in the parables of the hidden treasure and of the pearl, where Jesus shows us the value of this treasure within over all other treasures. This reconnection to divinity within us as spirit is the means and goal of the spiritual journey. To discover the nature of the outer and inner, we must go to the treasure within, to our closest source of spirit, even as we operate within the world. For within the temple of the heart, Wherever it is we are, we can discover the truth of our own identity as spirit, as part of the all, and it is within our potential and means to experience that ultimate ecstatic bliss that is the nature of this identity in every moment. And perhaps it is in this state of being spirit aware and spirit connected that fulfills the promise Jesus made to us, saying, "I have come that they may have life and have it to the full." Surely Jesus' intentions were not to amass power, wealth, or land for any religious or political body, nor to gain popularity and fame for himself. Rather, he acted selflessly to create a better world for others by trying to alter the root cause of incorrect creation, and that is the incorrect beliefs in what reality is, and incorrect actions that result from this untrue perception. Therefore, Jesus attempted to prevent such actions, such as inequality, immorality, and all forms of lack of love. Jesus understood that the best service that he could do for his fellow man is to work to undo the false perceptions, and his miracles served as proof of the good news that he was preaching, that the human being is truly spirit and is only now enslaved to a limited perception because of the delusion that has clouded all of our sight over the history of life. This world is the treasure hunt of the observer, a game designed to help us rediscover the essence of all, back to the awareness of spirit of which we are a part, back to being the unaltered observer, unaffected by delusion and its sufferings. And in this experience of God showing control and power in our lives, our faith in God's power deepens, and we begin to see God's love in everything and in all situations. And in this path, the individual self or ego becomes less and less as we are reprimanded, grown, and broken down until our will becomes His will and His love becomes our love, and we are built up in spirit once again. Often we get so caught up in the stories of our lives that we fail to see the messages that lie within each thing that comes to us. Each experience is a clue, a message designed to rebuild us into our true spirit nature and spirit remembrance. In reality, our lives are lovingly constructed as if we are each on our own individual river, a river which God has designed especially for us. Each bend, each waterfall, each view selected by Him so that we may know more and more and become better and better. And while some may be stuck or paddling upstream for now, we will all one day meet to become one in the ocean of our source. In this holy task, we get to see all for what it is. We have seen the world as physical. We have seen ourselves too as physical. But we are spiritual beings in a spirit world, each on an epic journey where God, our Spirit, is leading us, sometimes through hard lessons, other times through inspiration, and oftentimes through good works and active connection to and conversation with God, to come back to this awareness of God's reality and to our true reality through this connection that we each have with Him. It is a journey which brings us to the understanding of why Jesus said, "The kingdom is inside of you and it is outside of you." When you come to know yourselves, then you will become known, and you will realize that it is you who are the sons of the living Father. The evolved humans that have achieved seeing with the light of God have provided us with guidelines which catalyze the removal of ignorance and illusion. They advised us to follow a value system that honors the unity in our shared identity in spirit. They tell us that to experience what is the truth of what we see and what we are, we must commune with God in this love and to love everyone as equals, knowing that all is woven from this love. Through this understanding, we can come to see how all that is comes down to what was there before all was, and that is spirit, the most fundamental building block of the universe, undivided in truth, divided only by our limited perception. And this unity is what is stable and consistent. This unity is what will keep on eternally. The variations will change, as is its nature, but the underlying intelligence will remain conscious and loving always, as the only solid foundation, a rock upon which we should build our house of faith. And this stable and constant underlying nature of the universe is God as Spirit. Now knowing that we are united by this common bond of what we all are, and that our understanding of and connection to God is our salvation, and that He is leading each of us in this understanding and connection, we march onward in a new hope, a grander hope than we have imagined before. This unity and infinite love, the Spirit that is the fabric of the entire universe and that lies within us in its purest form, is accessible, and it is our promised land. And when this realization comes to humanity, then thy will be done on earth as it is in heaven.